All right, good afternoon. Happy Friday, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. As always, being in community and learning with you all is my favorite thing to do, my job, but also one of my favorite things to do. So welcome here today to an overview of nonprofit affiliations and mergers. For those who don't know me, my name is Alexis Alvarez, and I'm the Director of Statewide Training at Florida Legal Services. And I want to take a second to sort of quickly explain, as Director of Statewide Training, what our Statewide Training Initiative does. Most of you know, but we work to link our training throughout the pro bono and legal aid community throughout the state so that everybody has the opportunity to be in the same place, learning the same thing, so our legal aid and pro bono clients really get the best representation. And I bring that up today because the topic that we're talking about is exactly that. It's how important it is as nonprofits to affiliate, with other nonprofits and other organizations and really help each other help our causes. At the Statewide Training Initiative, we partner with other legal aid organizations. We put on training series that involve, for example, our human trafficking training that we had, a training series we had last month. I mean, we partnered with all these different organizations in order to make that happen. And I think those of you who have tuned in throughout know that we do that often. And without that collaboration, we wouldn't be what we are today. So on that note, I do want to give a shout out to the public interest law section of the Florida Bar, one of the organizations that we partner with very, very frequently in order to bring quality training right to your doorstep. And that includes this training. This is co-hosted by the Public Interest Law section of the Florida Bar, the nonprofit law subject matter work group, awesome people, awesome group, and really worth joining if you're looking for a network of like-minded people to come together and partner, affiliate, and merge. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into, I'm going to skip some of the housekeeping. This is being recorded. CLE credit was approved. You will get a copy of the recording and that CLE code. I'll pop the CLE code into the chat. And I will also pop my email into the chat. That way, if someone doesn't get the CLE code or doesn't get the recording and they want it, you can always reach out to me directly. And so with that being said, the only other piece of housekeeping announcements I want to fly through are questions and answers. We always want to hear from you. Interactivity. This is going to be a discussion with people that have a wealth of knowledge in this field. And we want to hear from you so we can fuel and foster that conversation even more. So please drop your questions into the chat. If you put them in the Q&A, we'll also be able to see them, but we're really monitoring the chat. So drop your questions into the chat. That way we can address them if they're topical to the moment or just in general so that we can all get a sense of community and share our thoughts. So don't be shy, give us your questions. And with that being said, I'm going to move into introductions. In no particular order, we have the amazing Christine Raymond here with us today. Christine serves as the Executive Director and General Counsel of Extraordinary Charities in Palm Beach County. Extraordinary Charities is a nonprofit serving other nonprofits through the operation of its nonprofit center, as well as through publications designed to shine a light on smaller nonprofit organizations. In addition to being a member of several local organizations, Christine also serves on the board of Digital Vibes, Curate Hope, and Holy Ground. And we also have the amazing Philip DiComo. Mr. DiComo is an attorney and shareholder at Mason, Yeager, Gerson, Harris, and Fumero. His representation of exempt organizations ranges from serving as outside counsel, providing guidance on a broad range of governance matters, as well as business and donor agreements, to reviewing commercial co-venture agreements, joint ventures, and strategic partnerships, guiding nonprofit mergers and other complex transactions. Mr. DiComo is a member of the Florida Bar, serves on the American Bar Association's Nonprofit Law Committee, and is a director of Nonprofits First and director of the Palm Beach County Cultural Council. And finally, we have the one and only Jeffrey Fromknecht. Jeff is a lawyer, an author, and a speaker who has had a passion for helping others. He is the managing attorney for Lawyers for Nonprofits. Jeff is licensed to practice law in both Pennsylvania and Florida. He holds graduate degrees in both social work and law and has more than 20 years of experience working at nonprofit organizations in a variety of direct service and management roles. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. For folks who, if you're not able to view gallery view, you should be able to, up in the corner, click the view button, drop down, and change it to gallery. That way you can get everybody in the camera for that conversation. If you're having a problem with that, DM me, because there's always a setting on Zoom that needs to be fixed somehow, some way. So I will work with you to make sure you can get the proper view. So thank you all for being here. And the floor is yours to our speakers.
All right, thanks, Alexis. And thank you, Christine and Phil, for being here. My name's Jeff. I'm the chair of the Public Interest Law Section Nonprofit Legal Work Group. We meet the first Friday of the month at noon. And so if this topic is interesting to you and you want to continue to engage in conversations like this, please consider joining the Public Interest Law Section and our work group. But today we're going to spend in the next hour talking about nonprofit affiliations and mergers, informal and formal. We have with us, two amazing speakers that have experience doing this from the inside out. And so we've structured today as a conversation. I'm going to interview Phil and Christine. We welcome any questions. As we discuss, we're going to talk a lot about examples of different types of partnerships and mergers and affiliations that all three of us have been involved in. But to get started, I'm gonna just allow we're gonna start with Phil, and we're gonna ask Phil just to tell us a little bit. We're gonna cover both formal and informal mergers today. We're gonna start off with Phil giving us a little overview of some of the legal issues or just a general overview of what a formal merger is and what it means. Phil?
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So a formal merger really stems from the statutes, right? So if you look at 607 and 617, it'll walk you through what the legal steps are required for a merger. I think the nonprofit statute is 617-1101 for the attorneys on the line. But really what a merger is when two organizations or corporations decide to legally combine with one another. And it involves filing merger documents with the Secretary of State. And generally, the surviving entity takes on the liabilities and obligations of the merged party, the other party. And there are a variety of ways to structure a merger. Oftentimes, one entity simply merges into the second entity, which is the surviving entity. Or you could have an entity merge into a subsidiary or an affiliate of the second entity, or have two entities merge into a newly formed not-for-profit entity. And there are some other more complicated structures, particularly in the for-profit world. But generally speaking, in the nonprofit world, we see one entity merge into a second entity, or two entities merge into a newly formed not-for-profit that has acquired its own tax-exempt status. But technically speaking, that's what a merger is. And from a legal standpoint, because it's prescribed by the statute, it is for lawyers, it's fairly simple in terms of how to construct a merger.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Phil. And we're going to get into the legal side of a formal merger, like Phil explained, is pretty simple. A couple organizations come together, and when it's all done, you end up with one organization, right? But as we're going to talk about later on, some of the more complex issues come with, okay, you've decided to merge, we filed this paperwork, now what, right? How do you bring together cultures? How do you bring together systems and operations? And so we're going to get more into that. So on one end of the spectrum, we have a formal merger that is something that happens through, it's prescribed by the statute. And Christine is, with her organization, Extraordinary Charities, Christine and I, they run a nonprofit center, and my office is there. So Christine and I are, although we are on separate screens, we are in the same building. And, Christine's organization, Extraordinary Charities, does a lot of informal affiliations and partnerships. And so I'm going to ask Christine to tell us a little bit about some of the types of relationships that you've been involved with through Extraordinary Charities and as well through some of the boards that you serve on.
Sure, absolutely. I think in the nonprofit sector, those kinds of collaborations and affiliations really run the gamut from anything starting with a handshake agreement between executives to a more formalized memorandum of understanding that lays out the expectation for different organizations. And, I think regardless of the way that the organizations are beginning to work together, it all starts with trust, right? A marriage may start on paper with the legal contract that you enter into, but really it's about the relationship between the parties. We recently started an initiative that's a for-profit, nonprofit partnership, workforce development program. And in structuring that program, it really was about, a dating period. We had to sit down and figure out, is this a good fit? Can we work together? Do I like you? Do I want to have a glass of wine with you after work? What's your organization's mission? It's really that just back and forth of figuring out who it is that you might have not only an organizational synchronicity with, but a relational synchronicity as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Christine. And sometimes the informal collaborations and partnerships, start off, like Christine said, in a dating period, right? It may be a situation where the two executive directors agree to meet on a regular basis, right? It may be, in the more informal side, it may be an informal sharing of some resources or space, right? I know, like at our facility here that Christine runs, they have a large meeting space. Mm-hmm. And, it's known that that space is open for others to use. I don't know that any of the charities have a specific contract that states the terms. It's more informal, right? And as lawyers, sometimes we struggle with informality, right? We like formality. We like things written down. We advise our clients to put pen to paper and get the terms of this agreement hammered down. And I think in the beginnings of some of these relationships, that's not, you don't know what's going to be on the piece of paper yet, right? And the informal collaborations, it may just be one time, it may be, an event here and there, but as with Christine's program, they can grow into more formal relationships. I think some of the other examples that you see out there, so we talked about mergers, we've talked about, affiliations like Christine and her workforce development project, where a number of organizations came together and said, hey, we're going to work towards a shared or a common goal, right? I think other times you will see fiscal sponsorship as an example of a collaboration and an affiliation, right? Fiscal sponsorship being where there's a project that doesn't have a corporate home. And oftentimes, sometimes these projects are initiatives of a number of other nonprofit organizations. And so fiscal sponsorship can be a tool where a project or an initiative led by a number of organizations can find a corporate home and begin to build and grow from there. Phil, in your experience, whether it's informal collaborations or formal mergers, what are some of the factors that drive these mergers? At least the ones that work.
Yeah, so they run the gamut, and some of them are really positive things, and some of them are negative things. Sometimes there's a crisis or a hardship that an organization is having, and that may stir some thoughts from the board to look around and say, hey, maybe there's someone we should be partnering with to solve the problem. And oftentimes that kind of a start may begin with a larger organization stepping in and help to manage a smaller organization. So in some cases, the affiliation may begin with a management agreement. So, a larger social service agency may come in and start to manage a smaller one that is having some kind of a crisis, either a leadership crisis or a financial crisis. And then, and that's an easy way to start the conversation and to start to get employees to work together and start to get leadership to work together. And it may start with taking on certain management roles. But other things that drive mergers are just a simple desire to increase services or expand services. It could be an organization that had a really good niche on something, but it was a niche of a larger service, and the awareness that, hey, we're really great, but when we partner with this other organization that has multiple services, we're even better. So that's a reality, and that takes a leadership and a board to kind of do a gut check and say what's really important. Furthering our exempt purpose is done better once we do that, and so you have to put aside egos in that situation. Another thing that we see often is where a founder of an organization or a CEO or an executive director is thinking, maybe it's time to move on. I'm working with a really small organization now that is one of these niche organizations, and the leadership is, after going through COVID and being in a real critical service area related to that, they're just tired and they're exhausted, and working with them, their take is, hey, we already work with this other bigger organization, and our assets and what we have are really small and really niche. So for them, the solution isn't a merger. They're going to simply wound down their organization and dissolve and distribute their assets to this other larger organization, and their employees and people are going to kind of work with that larger organization. So there are a variety of tools. We talk about merger on one side and just simple handshake affiliation on the other side, and there's a whole spectrum of tools along that spectrum. But the one other thing I also wanted to mention is just relationships, and as you said, people working together. And probably one of the biggest mergers I had were two organizations that really had a lot of animosity between them. And the CEO of the one nonprofit called me up one day and said, listen, their new CEO has been there for 2 years now, and I've gotten to know her. And I think for the first time in a long time, I can have a real serious conversation with her because I trust her. And that ultimately led to two really large nonprofit institutions merging together. And it was really based on the fact that the two CEOs built a relationship, going to industry events, being out in the respective communities, and building up a level of trust that was never there before in prior relationships. And that made all the difference.
Yeah, thanks. And you highlighted the same issue that Christine highlighted when, coming back to this idea of trust. Christine, I know that your organization just partnered and hosted an event in Palm Beach County focused on nonprofit collaboration. You want to tell us more about the importance of those types of events, and sort of how the role that those play in trying to drive mergers, and anything else you want to add about any of the factors that you've heard or that you heard people talking about that, encourage or help move these mergers or affiliations forward?
Sure. And that summit was really just a born out of a question. If we have 8,000 plus nonprofit organizations in Palm Beach County, why aren't we doing more? Why aren't we getting more done? Why don't we work together? So, really, the whole purpose of that was just to start sitting down with our peers and saying, okay, how can we build a model? How can we develop a way that makes it second nature for organizations to work together? Honestly, the first step was just knowing the players in the room. You don't know who you might partner with until you know they're out there. So that really was our first step, is just sitting down and trying to map the landscape of who the players are. Who are our literacy providers? Who are our food bank and food pantry providers? What sort of social service ecosystem could we construct if we worked together? And so really it was really interesting because much like this discussion today, it was a conversational format where we just had to get everybody in the room and start talking about, where are you lacking in service? Where are we strong in service? And how can we begin even talking about it? Because, a merger or a combination conversation is an awkward conversation to start. Imagine going to your peer/competitor across town and saying, hey, we want to take over what you do. That's an awkward conversation to even begin having. So the summit was really just a vehicle to start the conversation. Hi, I'm Joe nonprofit. I do X. I serve Y clients. And finding the Y to the X across the room, just saying, hey, I would love to be able to help you complete the continuum of care that you provide to your clients. So that really was, the first of what we hope to be a series of discussions on how can we develop a model for this? How can we begin to make it second nature for organizations to think about working with others? And really, we ended the day with a funder panel because, for most nonprofits, that comes into play. What are our funders going to think of whether we do or don't collaborate? And it was very, it was hopeful to hear from the funders like, hey, look, we see you. We're not going to take points off your grant application because you're wanting to bring somebody alongside you. Quite the opposite. That is a big asset to the funders, are you willing to set aside your organizational leader ego and bring in an organization that will help you serve your clients better? So super instructive discussion and just really a nice way to in a no risk setting, really, just to hear about what's out there and begin dreaming of ways that we might be able to work together.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, the common experience I've had with both of what you're sharing is, I think that what I'm hearing is, that these mergers are often driven or you need to get the buy-in of the CEO. Right. I mean, that's typically where these mergers start. They're not usually, in my experience, driven by the board. Maybe there's some suggestions from the board, but that, oftentimes are CEOs or folks that are on the ground that I understand their community, understand the other partners, and see opportunities. Right. And I think that creating those creating chances for those meetings and those opportunities to be discovered is important. That's why groups like what Christine is doing and some of these other options, because oftentimes, as nonprofits, at least the clients we work with, they're so ingrained in their issue, their topic space. They know all the players there, but they may not have relationships with some of the ancillary providers, right? Folks that are in the same community that serve a slightly different group or do something a little bit different. And there aren't a lot of opportunities for, just friendly meetings, right? But between them. We're doing some work right now with an organization. They're affiliating. They've been talking. The two CEOs have known each other for a decade. And they've been talking about this affiliation for 2 years, right? And a lot of it is driven, like Phil says, with succession planning in mind. And there's not necessarily a crisis, but they're looking towards the future and they're saying, what's going to be best for our clients, but also our staff, right? Because I think that, at nonprofits, one of the things that's maybe a little bit different from most for-profits is staff are like family, right? Just as important as it is the clients we're serving, the staff is also critical. And so oftentimes, that's something the CEOs and the executives are going to have a better sense of, in terms of what some of those issues are. We have an idea of some of the landscape of what's out there, right? So, I think often these collaborations and affiliations start, like any relationship starts with something small, right? A first date, a first meeting, doing some smaller event or project together. And oftentimes they will grow into more formal relationships. Like Phil mentioned, maybe that's a shared services agreement or a management agreement. It could, look at some shared control or maybe joint control if they're still separate entities. And, ultimately there may be good reasons to decide to formally merge, but not every collaboration ends in a merger, right? I think that's the other key to think about is sometimes, I've talked with clients, hey, why don't you partner with this group? Well, we don't want to merge with them. We want to maintain our own, our own identity. Okay, that's okay. No one's forcing you. But I think that idea that, you can engage and partner short of a merger is important as groups are in a crisis mode or thinking about how to grow and expand, thinking through that. But let's shift now a little bit. So we understand what some of the options are. Let's talk about some of the challenges, right? I'm going to turn to Phil, first to, I think, identify, and then that's, we can highlight some of the legal challenges, or maybe non-legal and non-legal challenges. I think, one of the things that when we've been prepping for this workshop today, Phil and Christine and I have talked about how, this is statutorily prescribed. This is, these agreements are often not complex and intended to be litigated, but that there's oftentimes broader non-legal challenges that impact affiliations and collaborations. And so, Phil, do you want to talk about some of the challenges that you've
Sure.
seen out there and some strategies of how you've addressed them?
Yeah. So Jeff, as you reminded me, as the article I wrote, is titled "When Culture Trumps Contracts," and I think in most nonprofit mergers, the cultural issues are the biggest issues, and sometimes it's just the distinct work cultures of the organizations or the board cultures, and sometimes those are huge hurdles to get through. Sometimes it's just territorialism. So that's, I think, where it all starts, and I think that's the first thing is, like, can you culturally blend in with this organization, and how are you going to do it, and what's the strategy to do that? And by the way, sometimes when we do these affiliations, consolidations, mergers, sometimes we will suggest bringing in a consultant, like a strategic planning consultant, to say, okay, now let's vision this. If we beyond the legal structure, if we join together, what does this look like, and what does this help us accomplish? How does this change our goals? And so sometimes it's important to do that. So that's the biggest issue. But there are other ones that come up. Sometimes it's just simple government and regulatory issues. And that's a reason why you see some mergers where they don't actually merge, but they do a consolidation. So, in Palm Beach County, the very publicly known merger, the ARC of Palm Beach County, had two organizations that consolidated with it. So the organizations' boards were essentially ceded control. So it wasn't a pure merger. But part of the reason for that is because of the government and regulatory issues that had to be gone through over a period of time. Perhaps they may do a formal merger at some point down the road, but when the two public television stations in South Florida merged, there were FCC issues and funding issues related to Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Those were huge issues. That merger took like 2.5 years to accomplish because of cultural issues with the boards and because of all these government and regulatory considerations. You had to get FCC approval for that. So sometimes there's just really basic diligence issues. Other times there are funder issues. Do you have restricted gifts? How does this affect that? Do you have issues with benefactor egos? Typically, the major funders, the United Ways, the CSCs, things like that, typically they're going to be very supportive of a merger. If they see this is going to result in efficiencies and result in expanding service, typically they're going to work with you, and but that's one of the questions is if we both have the same funder, and if we merge, or are we going to risk losing money? So we're going to get less money from that funder. So sometimes it's a negotiation with the funder that goes along with that merger. Also, sometimes there's just history or baggage in the organization, just pure due diligence issues. Jeff and I worked on a merger together where, there was an issue stemming from something that was in an audit of one of the organizations, which brought up some issues that, had to be dealt with and kind of thrust through. And so sometimes there's contractual issues with third parties that you have to deal with. But common due diligence issues that you would see in any transaction, sometimes arise. One of the big ones is when you have a power differential among the organizations. So you have a very strong organization, and then you have a weaker organization, and then issues related to the merger. The stronger organization typically wants to put their thumb on the button a little more and kind of say, well, we don't really care about this program, or we don't care about this something that the smaller organization may care about. So those are issues you've got to sit down, talk through, work it out. And, there may be things you want to do to build in protections for certain programs or things that you've got from a legacy standpoint of an organization. So power differential is a big difference. Which could result in how do we apportion board seats? It's always a big discussion. Well, if they merge into us, do we split the board, or do all of their board members come in? What if they don't want to come join us? And so that's always a discussion. Programmatic issues are a discussion. Management issues. If you have two CEOs, are you going to have a co-CEO? Or in the case of the merger of the two public television stations, the Miami station had a fairly new CEO. The West Palm Beach station had an established CEO, but the West Palm Beach CEO was a former CFO, and he's the one who actually came up with the solution, and that is, I will take second seat and be the CFO. Now that's a rare thing for someone to do, is to put aside their ego for the benefit of the organization. But those are issues that come up, and you've got to work through them. And then you've got the distinct work culture, the employee issues, and all of that. And, we can keep going on and on with that conversation, I think. But,
Yeah.
I think I hit the key issues.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything you want to add there, Christine? Some of the challenges that you've seen? And
I mean, I think reinforcing, what Phil said about some of the personalities coming into play, I think those are amplified when you're talking about an organization that's still founder led. And I think that's something, if you're talking about a merger between an organization who's still run by its founder and one that's gone through some iterations of leadership change, that presents its own unique issues there too. That ego question, when it's your baby, makes it even harder.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring in, those are factors that, sort of need to be addressed ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's why your statement about, having some dating period and making sure that it is something that both parties can get to, right, can stomach and are comfortable with. But, those succession planning, and, I think at some point, a lot of founders see that they want their baby to continue. And oftentimes the only way for that to happen is to, no one else can be willing to put in the time and effort they have, most of it uncompensated. And so they look for somewhere to house that. We have a question come up. I think it's a great question. So mm-hmm. I want to, I think it touches on some of the due diligence requirements that go into mergers and affiliations. But we have a question that says, in a scenario where there's two nonprofits that are thinking about a merger or some type of affiliation, does each nonprofit have its own counsel? And in a merger, in a traditional merger, yes, both parties would have, because they both are going to have unique and distinct interests, right? And as part of a merger, there is going to be, and maybe Phil can go into some of the some of the elements of due diligence, but even in a simple merger, the board of directors of both organizations, you know, continue to have a fiduciary responsibility to the organization to make sure that it's acting in the organization's best interest. And with mergers, you know, oftentimes with mergers, I'm representing the founder-led group, right? And they come to me and they say, hey, you know, this 30-year-old organization wants to merge with us and take over our program. That seems great, doesn't it? Or, you know, or it'll be, you know, a new project, this older group, the guy wants to retire and wants us to take over his organization. Isn't that great? With all this, you know, they have money and resources. Well, maybe it's great, maybe it isn't, right? There are issues that can pop up with mergers. You know, when you merge in a statutory merger, you're taking on all the assets, but you get all the liabilities as well. And so that's a part of the due diligence that is required is to identify, you know, what, if any, liabilities may or may not be out there from a regulatory perspective, from a litigation perspective, you know, employment perspective. That's a big one. You know, did they wrongfully terminate someone 2 years ago and it's hanging out there? And so they're both parties will have counsel. Phil, do you want to talk a little bit about what's involved in a typical due diligence for, you know, just maybe we can talk about the two small organizations we merged that had no staff, and so it was a pretty straightforward due diligence. But you want to talk about the due diligence requirements?
It's so if anyone out there is familiar with corporate mergers, I mean, it's the same starting place, same premise from a due diligence standpoint. So, you know, first you want to start by looking at their organizational documents. You want to, you know, very basic things like making sure that, you know, they're active in the state of Florida, their governance documents, you know, allow them to do this, and you know what requirements there are for, you know, approvals and things. You know, a very simple thing is, are they a membership organization or a non-membership organization? And then what are the approval rights related to that? In Florida allows nonprofits to have statutory members. And I say that because I don't mean I give $40 a year to the public television station I'm a member and I have statutory rights as a member. I mean that the governance documents create members, and it also creates rights in members. Associations, for example, often have members, but that's something that has to be looked at and vetted through and determine what does that mean. And so the gamut, you want to look at third-party contracts, you want to review their financials and their audits. As I mentioned before, when Jeff and I were working on a merger, you know, he was doing the diligence related to his client and discovered that, you know, their audit indicated a potential issue with IP ownership. So, you know, that had to be vetted out and worked through. So sometimes there's third-party contract rights, sometimes the donor agreements need to be gone through. Some of them, you know, prohibit mergers from the standpoint that they need approval related to any transaction. And that could be an issue if you have a large donor or a grantor who says, well, you know, we're not giving you this grant if you know, change your leadership without us consenting to it. You know, that's not something you want to find out after you merged, right? You got to flush all these details out. So part of the merger process is you go through that diligence. You know, you literally go through your checklist and look for any issues that may be something that you've got to work through from a legal standpoint, and also dealing with all the cultural issues as well. And some of the issue, a lot of times when organizations come to me and say, hey, we think we want to merge with another organization, a lot of times they conceptually think, oh, well, we only need one attorney to do this, right? Because we're at the end of the day, we're going to be one organization. and that's not a good idea. And you really need to be represented on both sides of the equation. I will say that there have been, I have a recent issue where a client is going to be dissolving and distributing its assets, and you still have to do the same kind of, diligence and confirmation of everything. And in that case, the smaller organizations, we don't have money to pay an attorney, and we're not planning on doing it. Well, I represent one organization, and to the extent that you're relying on me, that's going to be an issue. So, there are ways you can represent the organization and try to waive conflicts, but for the most part, you really want to have separate representation of the
Counsel.
clients and really insist on it.
Yeah. Well, we have a question that popped up here. I think it is relevant. I think before we get to that, Phil and I have talked about this before, and Christine, oftentimes when it comes to due diligence, it is similar to a for-profit transaction, but there are differences, right? And sometimes the role of the lawyer in this, or at least I've found my role to be helping educate the board about the nature of the transaction, the risks associated with it, and what's really happening. Because often if you have board members that are businessmen and women, they have an idea of what a merger is, a corporate merger or a corporate takeover. And, there's all these different ideas out there. And a nonprofit merger affiliation is often, I mean, there can be hostile takeovers and scenarios where that's not true, but it's often, more of an issue, like Phil said, of culture and relationship merging rather than an issue with the business side of it, right? So the question I'm going to direct this to Christine, but we have a question from Dominic that says, have you seen successful co-op structures where organizations don't merge, but there's an umbrella entity that houses administrative and other shared services, while allowing the nonprofit to focus on a program? You want to talk about any structures you've seen like that, Christine?
Yeah, I kind of feel like I know one of those. So that's a little bit of what we've tried to create. So we own a building that now houses 9 separate nonprofits, and there are services that are shared. So a lot of the organizations that have space here, they don't have the budget or the need for full-time HR. So that's something that is part of being in the building. Excuse me. I'm available to do HR consulting for them or contract review. I mean, from that standpoint, it works really well because, not everybody needs to or has the ability to lengthen their organizational structure to encompass all those things. On the same token, there are services that would be so much more beneficial if we could create a shared service like that. I think the one that always comes to mind, and the one that I think people ask me most frequently about, is health insurance. What kind of shared structure would be possible to provide health insurance to nonprofit employees? Grant writing, sharing grant writing services among a group of organizations is another great way to create a shared services agreement. And like any kind of shared services structure like that, it's all about transparency in what you're expecting. If this is something that we're all participating in, whose obligation comes first? If we're sharing a grant writer between 9 organizations, whose grant comes first? Can you write a grant for 6 different organizations to the same funder? It works, but not without transparency.
Yeah, and I think that, you highlight the idea of a shared service agreement, which is something that I've seen often used, where, one organization maybe doesn't have the capacity to do its finance or its HR or its fundraising. to some extent, and then it will, contract with another group that has the capacity to do that. We're doing right now with an organization that has, and they're doing that. They've also done a change of control, right? Where the larger organization took control of the smaller organization through a membership structure. And that allows the larger organization to oversee and make sure programs are that there's oversight, but it allows the smaller group to keep its identity. It allows the board to stay in place and allows it to, continue to serve the clients it's looking at. Now, maybe down the line, is there a potential that they'll do a formal merger? Sure. I think, maybe that's always a potential. The other issue that you brought up, Christine, was, where the other place I've seen this is in terms of health insurance, and maybe Phil wants to add anything here, but what I've seen in my experience is, that for ERISA purposes, right, the benefits purposes, typically, oftentimes large nonprofits have corporate structures that involve more than one entity. And so for health benefit purposes, you want to be able to have all of them covered by the same benefits. And so, I have seen corporate structures, parent subsidiary structures that are aligned, similar to the alignment that's suggested in the question, right? Where there is a parent organization that has a number of subsidiaries. They're all independent, and maybe they were set up for tax purposes or liability exposure purposes, but they all, they share resources. And those are permitted. I think there are, there's some rules that govern that. Phil, do you want to weigh in? You have any other?
Well, I was actually, I was going to say something similar in that. One of the things that makes it easier for a large organization to absorb a smaller one and even keep the identity of that organization is oftentimes these large organizations, especially larger social service agencies, are already structured that way. So there may be, under an umbrella name, they may have their own foundation that does fundraising. They may have their own, contract services arm. They may have their own, other services arm, and they may be, separate entities. And so when you have a situation like the ARC here, and the Siegel Industries comes in and becomes a part of their umbrella, basically, it's a lot easier because they've already got the administrative structure. They've already got, all of those components to provide the services, to the employee services, and all of those pieces in place. And so from an efficiency standpoint, that's certainly something that we've seen people take advantage of. And again, from my perspective, we've seen a lot more of this in the last year than we've seen in the prior 5 years. We've seen more consolidations, more mergers, more just joint ventures where people are working together. And, I thought maybe at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we'd start to see that tail off, but that's not been the case. Just the opposite. I continue to see organizations, looking for opportunities to be more efficient, to work, better together. And I think it's not just the nonprofit sector. But I think we've been seeing it in the nonprofit sector since COVID, and I think we're going to continue to see it for at least another year or so.
Yeah, we did one of the foundations down here in Palm Beach County I looked into this issue for them. Spent some time and wrote up a little memo. And there are some structures where that might exist. That the issue that we ran into with creating a co-op like structure is the administrative burden that is involved with creating it and then maintaining it, right? And we had explored some ideas of creating a membership-based group that everyone could join, and then if you joined, you'd have access to certain services, include, the big driver was trying to get health benefits, because that's something that small nonprofits, if you're under, I don't know, 500 employees, 100 employees, you really have no leverage. And then, so another follow-up question here, if a nonprofit's struggling and looking for a potential merger, should they reach out to an attorney, or how can they do that? Christine, any thoughts on what, what the for a nonprofit that's looking for a dance partner, what's the best way they can go about trying to find one?
I feel like there's a new field that's about to be born, a nonprofit matchmaker. But really, I think I don't know that should be your first step, but I think an organizational assessment is probably the best place to start and figure out, hey, look, where are we going? Where do we want to go? And I think after you've completed that kind of really hard look at your organization, then if it seems like a good fit, yeah, I think you can explore potential partners, but again, it's like a blind date. It would be a difficult way to start, I think, a merger discussion without coming from an attorney. But maybe a nonprofit matchmaker broker is not a bad business. I don't know.
Yeah, and I would just say that, I think typically by the time it gets to us, there's already been some discussions happening. I don't, Phil can weigh in, but I know lawyers are bound by some confidentiality rules. And so if you call us and say, hey, do you know any nonprofits that might be looking to merge? We could probably reach out to some clients and say, hey, we have this organization, we know they're looking. But I don't know that the lawyers are the first place that I would start. Phil, do you have any thoughts on?
No, I agree with both of you, and I think Christine was right on. When I talk to boards about their responsibilities and duties, one of the things I always say from like a strategic process component is, where's your organization today? Where is it trying to get to? And how, as a board member, are you able to help them fill that gap to go from point A to point B? And I think there are some times when you as directors say, we don't see that path, right? And I think if you don't see that path, then that's the point when you and your directors should talk to the executive director and the CEO and say, wait a minute, something's off kilter here. If we can't accomplish this, then maybe we need to look at affiliations, maybe we need to look at mergers, those kind of things. So from the board perspective, but I think, Jeff, to your earlier point, I think oftentimes it does come from staff. It isn't the executive director or the key staff who says, listen, we're working with these guys anyway, or I keep seeing this group and we keep running into each other, the same funders or whatever it might be. That's typically where the discussion, or when there's something more critical going on. And in one merger that we just finalized at the end of last year, the reason it happened was because they had a crisis with their leadership, and their leadership disappeared for all intents and purposes. And the board said, holy crap, what do we do now? And they said, well, there's this other organization in the county next to us. They're doing exactly what we're doing, except they're doing it better, more efficiently, and in ways that we haven't been able to accomplish. Let's go talk to them. And that resulted in the second organization coming in, stepping in and managing it in a crisis situation, because it was the only way to keep these services in that county. And they said, listen, it's part of our mission. It's just expanding our geography. We will step in and work with your employees to make sure that happens. In the year that happened, the result of both boards was we need to just merge together. So oftentimes it's more organic than saying, let's call Phil.
Yeah, great question though. And I think that, the thing that we've seen, or that you've highlighted, is a full-on merger. That's a big change. And that usually is going to be driven by a crisis, right? No one likes change. Nonprofits aren't any different. Boards aren't any different. And so I would say that, 7 out of 10 times that's driven by a crisis. I've worked with a couple organizations that, have got to that conclusion through more of a strategic planning process as well. Like Phil was mentioning, they're sort of looking at the next 5 years and saying, oh, we're not there, right? We don't have the capacity to do what we want to do. Are there ways that we can grow? And that's sort of the other side is, opportunities for growth. I think that's often what the larger nonprofits see, is that there's an opportunity for growth through acquiring this organization, whereas they don't have to start from scratch, right? But that it often is something that is hard to arrange, and you kind of have to let the groups get there themselves. Has been my experience. You can, like Christine has said, you can guide them, you can put them in the same room together, you can give them drinks, but you can give them time to continue to meet and talk and sort it out. But it's tough to force anything. So we have about 3 minutes left. Christine, I'll let you go first. Is there any advice or tips that you want to share with groups that are thinking about trying to affiliate or maybe collaborating with a group and want to take it to the next level? Is there any tips or advice or suggestions you want to share?
Yeah, I think two things come to mind. I think the first and most important thing is to set clear expectations at the outset. Really be clear about what you're trying to accomplish, and whether it's you're coming into it from a position of weakness or you're really coming at it from an efficiency standpoint. Be clear about what you expect at the end of the day. In that vein, I think transparency is going to make or break the merger. It's going to come out if you've got the IP issue that's hidden in your audit. It's going to come out if there are issues that are perhaps not as good as you'd like them to be. So transparency, I think in all things merger and affiliation related is key. Because once the trust breaks down in that kind of discussion, that's it. That's the end of whatever affiliation it is. If it is something that you're looking to have some longevity, it might make sense to start some documentation, not just for yourself, but for your boards. While most of the legwork in any affiliation is going to take place between individuals, your board is the one that's going to be coming behind you and hopefully reinforcing what you're doing. So it might make sense to put some stuff on paper so that your board knows exactly what's going on. And then really, be intentional about combining your cultures. Don't expect that that's just going to fall into place. It sounds like one of those cheesy, touchy-feely things, but get to know each other. Have a go to Drive Shack, go to Top Golf, hit some golf balls together. Do something to really be intentional about merging those cultures, because you can't just stick even similarly mission-minded people together. You can't just stick them in a room and think it's going to work. You've got to be intentional about building the culture and combining the culture. And then I think lastly, I would say be patient. While you can do the documents in some, relatively easy amount of time, the culture and the combination of personalities is going to take some time. I don't think you can decide within the first 30 days whether it was a good move or not. Be patient, be intentional. It's really, it sounds like I'm putting a psychologist hat on, but that's really what it is. Be intentional and be patient.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I think it's fantastic. And Phil, any strategies that you've seen work, thinking about the cultural issues, post-merger operational issues that you've employed, that you've seen work in some of your mergers as we close out here?
Sure. The first thing is everyone's got to put emotions and ego aside, and you're going to have board members who have a hard time doing that. And so you being the CEO or the person on the front line of the merger are going to have to deal with board members who are not doing that. You're going to have to, get them to do that. And it's not easy. It's difficult. But there are some things that you can do to, from a structural standpoint, to make the merger easier and to give you impetus to get your cultures together. And there are things that you can do to protect the weaker organization, to protect programs that need to be protected. And you can do that through the merger agreement, through contractual terms. You know, one of the things that we did in a very technical way when we merged the two public television stations was we created a transition term where for a 2-year period, we had co-board chairs, one from each legacy organization. We had certain quorum requirements where the quorum requirement wasn't just, 50% of the board, it was 50% of the, representatives of each legacy organization on the board. So there are things that you can build in. You can have, certain voting requirements. Certain things can't happen without, certain votes. So there's lots of legal process things that we can do to help the situation. I can tell you with the public television merger, the wonderful thing was that we built in, there was a lot of animosity going in. It was a difficult merger to get through. Like I said, it took 2+ years to do it. And so we built in all these protections for both organizations. And at the end of the day, we didn't need any of them. At the end of the 2-year transition term, I had to remind them, oh, by the way, we now need to recognize that these are coming out of our bylaws. We're going back to one chair, no more co-chairs. And everyone was like, wow, we assimilated so much better than we thought we would. So, and that's where, it's going out and golfing together and having social and just getting people to talk on a human level that makes an enormous difference. So, compromise is going to have to take place. We can build in legal structural considerations to protect the major issues to the extent you have them. But at the end of the day, put your egos aside, move forward. And as the IRS always, instructs you to do, focus on fulfilling your exempt purpose.
Mhm.
Right. Well, we're at our time here, and so Alexis is back on. She's going to give us our CLE code. If there's any remaining questions, I'm happy to stay on. I know Christine has a meeting she may have to jump to, but I appreciate Christine and Phil sharing some of their wisdom and experience with us today as it relates to nonprofit affiliations and working together and mergers. And with that, I'll turn it over to Alexis and see if there's any last questions.
Awesome. And so while I fill up this airtime, please feel free to put into the chat or the Q&A anything that you'd like to ask. Christine did put her email into the chat for anybody who wants to follow up or does have any additional questions. And as always, you will have my email address. I did drop it into the chat. It'll come through in the email with your recording and the CLE credit. You can always reach out to me too, and I'm always happy to liaison between our amazing speakers here today. And so with that being said, the CLE code is 6916. Again, that's 6916. And it's 1 general CLE credit and 1 business litigation certification credit. If anyone has an issue inputting it or has any follow-up issue or anything with the CLE credit, again, you can always reach out to me, but I did check it before we got on to make sure that the Florida Bar was acknowledged it, so it should work. But as always, if you have any issues, reach out to me directly. And the email that you all will receive will come from Zoom, not from me. So don't look for an email from me. It'll come from Zoom and it'll have a copy of the recording, the CLE code, and I'll pop in Phil's article, which I also put in the chat for anyone that might have missed it. And I will add Christine's email and Jeff's email since they are in here. And with that being said, I don't have any final announcements other than to thank you all very much. And a question to come in is PA. So Mark, message me, email me. I can get you a reciprocal certificate of attendance, and then we can work from there. Email me separately, Mark. But I thank you all so much for coming. I thank you all as speakers for being here and providing us with this knowledge. You do really cool stuff and cool stuff that, really we can all benefit from, and that we should all really, take into our daily lives with working in our nonprofits and trying to really connect as organizations and really maximize ourselves as organizations. So I loved this and I loved listening to you all. And with that being said, Jeff, is there any last minute thing that you want to say?
No, just thank you for having us, and thank you everyone for participating today.
Awesome. And always a reminder, I put it in the chat, it'll come through the email, but consider joining PILS, the public interest law section of the Florida Bar. Like I said, there's a link that's in the chat about more information, but I'll also include it in the email. Great organization, great opportunities, and we hope to see you there. And with that being said, everyone, have a wonderful Friday. It's Friday. And a great weekend.
Thank you, Alexis.
Take care, y'all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.